Keeping up with security issues across thousands of web assets without the right approach to web application security is a daunting task. Get ahead with web vulnerability scanning automation from NetSparker, a leader in dynamic and interactive application security testing known for its ease of use and accurate results. Detect a wide range of vulnerabilities in all legacy and modern web applications, address security bugs at scale by automating the confirmation process, automatically prioritize vulnerabilities, and assign actionable tickets to the right developers in their native workflows for rapid remediation. For more information on how to scale application security with ease, visit securityweekly.com/NetSparker. Qualys has brought together vulnerability management and patch management, letting security teams discover vulnerabilities and apply patches immediately, all within a single, unified app. Sign up for a free trial of Qualys VMDR, vulnerability management, detection, and response today at securityweekly.com/Qualys.
Welcome back to Paul's Security Weekly. I am your host, Matt Alderman, joined by Larry Pesce, Lee Neely, Tyler Robinson, and Jeff Mann. Security Weekly listeners save $100 on their RSA Conference 2021 All Access Pass. RSA Conference will be a fully virtual experience from May 17th to the 20th, 2021. Security Weekly will be live streaming Monday through Thursday in Virtual Broadcast Alley, interviewing some of our top sponsors and speakers for the event. To register using our discount code, please visit securityweekly.com/RSAC 2021 and use the code SU1Cyber. We hope to see you all there. Do you have a specific guest or topic that you want us to cover on one of the shows? Submit your suggestions for guests by visiting securityweekly.com/guests and completing the form. We review suggestions monthly and will reach out to you once reviewed. Joel Wallenstrom is the CEO and president of Wickr and a world-renowned information security expert. He has led top white hat hacker teams responding to some of the most high-profile incidents in the past 20 years. Under his executive guidance, Wickr has since pivoted the company from solely offering a free consumer product to a robust enterprise compliance-ready secure collaboration platform used by the Fortune 500 and top federal organizations. Prior to joining Wickr, Joel co-founded ISEC Partners, one of the world's leading information security research teams, later acquired by the NCC Group. Joel, welcome to Paul's Security Weekly.
Great to be here. I'm not sure what world in which I'm renowned, but I like that anyways. Thank you for that.
I'm sure it was your marketing team or your PR team that gave me the world renowned, so you can thank them.
Absolutely, I will.
So I've known Wickr because of the Wickr Me app, which I assume was the consumer free product in your bio. And I didn't realize this, that you had pivoted into a much broader set of capabilities. So before we dig into some of the challenges around collaboration in the industry and stuff, just give us a little bit of history of Wickr and the evolution that's happened over the past few years.
Sure, no problem. So to your point, it started off as a consumer app, Wickr Me. Very, very secure, very private. You needed to use a handle, still do. Nothing lasted more than a week. So really built for a finite use case. I used it in my old job for, communicating with clients about 0 days, those types of things that we really cared about. But it had some scale issues in terms of using it at scale in an enterprise setting. And before I was at Wickr, somebody just approached me and said, do you think that there is a space, a room, a kind of product market fit for end-to-end encryption in the enterprise? And to which I said, yeah, I'm using it all the time. It's just nobody's really built anything specifically to be deployed at scale. And once I said that out loud, I had people asking me if I wanted to come to Wickr and build it. And so that's what we did.
Yeah, my first experience with Wickr Me was probably a similar use case, right? You use it as a consumer. You want privacy in your communications. And I got to tell this little story because it's kind of fun. Some people know it, but not a lot of people. When we were recruiting Amit Yaron when I was over at Tenable, I wasn't allowed to talk to Amit by the executive team. But I worked for Amit for 2.5 years at RSA, and so I would literally go to a conference and I would keynote right behind him. So how do I not talk to the man, right? and so he's like, So I remember we're sitting in the green room in Abu Dhabi. I think this was 2016. It was fall of 2016 for RSA Abu Dhabi. And he goes, I'm coming to Tenable, right? I said, no, I'm not supposed to know that because I'm not allowed to talk to you. He goes, fuck that. He goes, here's my Wickr handle. You communicate to me that way. So that's how Amit and I used to communicate way back in the day.
Well, I mean, so there's a really good, example of some of the limitations around being that private, because you and Amit are somewhat like-minded and capable of understanding what a handle is. When I was getting recruited into Wickr, it was right after the, Podesta debacle of 2016. And there were all these elected officials getting onto Wickr, and it was, elected official Jones was Jones Dog 22. And that just didn't work with the normal person. I think people who are more advanced in the security industry, handles are not a problem for us. That's kind of what we've always done. But, the larger population needed some help understanding how to find people, how to, kind of onboard and use the product. And so that's a lot of what the enterprise product's all about.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about some of the challenges with building an enterprise end-to-end encrypted platform, because it might be easy to say it, but I bet it's a lot harder to actually do it.
Litigation hold. There you go. That's the first hard thing. Day one, I came in and, I come from an enterprise background or working with a lot of enterprise clients. There's certain things you take very seriously as a CISO or as a compliance officer or as a general counsel, CFO. And, the world that was end-to-end encryption, and still on the consumer side, there tends to be a little bit of a renegade. I don't care. I'm just going to go run roughshod over the rules. Well, there aren't a lot of companies that take that approach in terms of how they operate or how they deal with regulators. So that was one of the first things. We had to figure out how to follow the rules. And what our strategy is not to build something that followed a set of rules, rather build something that's flexible enough that customers can configure it to conform to their rules, whether that's their corporate rules or their industry rules, whatever the case may be.
Yeah, having spent a lot of time in governance, risk management, compliance in the early days, right? Data retention is not like a specific time window for every organization. It varies, right? And so to your
point, all over the
point,
place.
Yeah, you needed flexibility to say how long should this data be available, when should it get destroyed safely so it's not available anymore, and that varies organization by organization and regulation by regulation.
Absolutely. So, look, end end encryption is it doesn't need to follow a set of rules. It just binds devices and makes sure that everything's private and there's no potential for the service provider, in this case Wickr, or the network provider, to have access to that data. So on what you do on the endpoint, what you do in terms of your corporate rules is up to you. So you can retain things if you want to. We can get into that a little bit more, how we specifically handle that problem. But that's why end-to-end encryption makes so much sense, is because it just kind of deals, well, let me rephrase, makes so much sense for the enterprise, because, I think what you're talking about is this real struggle of most of the organizations I'd worked with in my past life saved everything, and they weren't securing everything they were saving. So it's just, there's just this propagation of data everywhere, sensitive and otherwise, that just is kind of silly. We don't need it. Hey, one other thing that was in terms of you asking about the challenges of end-to-end encryption in the enterprise, distribution of software, right? Like, we can't come in and tell Acme company that we're going to redefine their identity management strategy. We just can't. So, we had to look to adopting like standards like OIDC, figuring out ways to give companies a product that they could provision and deprovision. It sounds simple, but really that's not all that simple.
So one of the things you mentioned, you're talking about enterprise use, and I'm in the federal space, and a big thing for us is not just encryption, but key escrow, as well as records retention. For example, certain official government records have to be turned over to NARA unencrypted for archiving. Mm-hmm. So my question is, how'd that sit with a platform that was basically designed to encrypt communications and throw it away eventually?
Well, I think it's set really well. That's our biggest, your industry is our biggest customer base. Again, the promise of end-to-end encryption is elimination of, I like to say, the service provider. So we just essentially, our customers have a headless client, and they own the data. We can't there's mathematical certainty that Wickr is not a path to anything that's being communicated. So they have the cryptographic certainty that everything that's been transmitted is only accessible by the sender and the receiver or receivers if it's in a group. And then if they want to turn on compliance, it just tells that group, hey, it doesn't say there's a headless client, but it says this is a compliance network. And so this conversation is going to be retained for compliance purposes. It's kind of simple. So, to be honest,
technologically, does that just involve adding additional keys to the keychain pairs to make that possible?
Think of it more, when we're doing our kind of end-to-end encryption, and we go a step further into perfect forward and backward secrecy. So a lot of key rotation, but that's all happening at the client. So when you have, this is not how it happens, but an easy way to think of it is, you assign somebody in your organization to handle compliance, and they have their own phone, their own node that's part of that group. So the key exchanges are, all of that logic exists on the client, and there's just a headless client that sits there and says, I'm going to pull all this data down into its structured data. They can grep against it and, using whatever EDI tools they use. And I think the most important part of this is anything that doesn't need to be retained isn't. And anything that doesn't need to be retained is not in cold storage for retention purposes. So you're really just like compressing the data footprint that's in any way, shape, or form accessible to a competitor, adversary, whatever the case may be. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's kind of a great high level overview from the work from home kind of situation that has exponentially grown. I'm sure that's obviously added some additional capabilities and some additional customers, right? What kind of challenges did you guys see and kind of influx from the work from home? And additionally from that, does that change kind of the platform itself, or were you guys already set to scale and be able to handle that?
Yeah, this might end up sounding a little bit salesy, and apologies, but I'm just, it's transparent. This was our experience. We certainly didn't build this for a pandemic, but we built this for the use case of, work from home, but basically being able to take even sort of, really sensitive workflows and take them outside of the office. Remote work was the thing that we built this for. A year and I don't know, what is it, like 14 months ago, the thing that we had to deal with was a demand spike that was pretty significant. And, something else we haven't talked about the product is we deploy self-hosted. There's self-hosting or on-prem options. And so in some of those larger customer bases, it was really just kind of the customer success onboarding part of this that we had to ramp up faster because, we'll be talking to our customers and say, okay, we'll start with 500 people, we'll move to 1,000, we'll gradually, get up into, maybe 5 figures. And, we were seeing demand for 6 figures in some cases. And so it was scaling the company to deal with more of the customer service issues and the customer success issues that was the challenge. And then invariably, any company that just grows or any technology that's when the demands placed on it are that different, that fast, we just kind of ran into some normal scale stuff.
Awesome. So one last question. Kind of curious, what are some of the lessons you've learned from running an end-to-end encryption company? And then from that, what were some things that you had no idea you'd end up having to deal with running a company such as Wickr? Also, Jennifer Detrani said to say what's up.
D-Train. So one of the things that attracted me to this was building a product where everything's eventually consistent. So, there is no centralized server and there's no centralized source of truth that makes all the nodes, gets everybody on the same page at the same time. So we're essentially passing around logic around millions of nodes. And it's very obviously critical, is a big part of the ratcheting that we do to make sure that all the messages come in order. A sequencing around messaging is really important. That seemed like, I don't know, trying to fix a car engine with a blindfold. And that challenge seemed really interesting to me. So the interesting thing is it didn't end up being as challenging as, and now I need to go back to that, like me being world renowned. I couldn't fix our car engine. I've hired incredibly bright people to do that. And I've watched them and I've been amazed that it's not quite as hard as I anticipated it being to figure out how to do this type of engineering at scale. The other thing that came in is we were doing this. I mean, right now we could be on Wickr. We have video conferencing, and the video conferencing world in my past companies were a lot of my customers. And I think, prior to 2020, video conferencing was just terrible. What was Zeus? Zoom's first tagline was video conferencing that doesn't suck. That was the bar that the industry had set. And then we were going to layer End End Encryption on top of that. And that seemed rather daunting as well. And yet, I think the quality of our video conferencing is, probably orders of magnitude better than, say, the WebEx's 3 or 4 years ago. So that's moved really fast. One of the things I've learned the most, and as it pertains to just end-to-end encryption, is I was also really attracted to this job because I felt like with success we were going to get involved in the conversation, kind of the backdoor conversations. This is a Fourth Amendment debate that's been raging for a long time. And it was pretty exciting to me that I felt like I was going to be there, as there's real understanding and or solutions put in place. And what I've learned is we're having the same debate for today that we were having 20 years ago. It really hasn't matured. It's a little bit disenchanting for me, to be honest.
So with all that you've done, did you run into any challenges trying to work outside the U.S. versus inside the U.S.?
I'd say no, but expand on that. Like, what kind of challenges? Technical or regulatory, or what?
I was thinking go all the way from regulatory, like GDPR, to that encryption doesn't work for me. I need this strange ass thing because I don't trust the U.S. certified encryption, or what. I'm just making that up.
Sure. Well, okay. So number one, you certainly cannot go to an app store in China and get Wickr, right? So that's a challenge. Same thing would go in, some other countries that we all know of. The cool thing is if you bring it into the country, it works great. I get tons of messages out of China, on a weekly basis. But there are some of those challenges. GDPR, quite honestly, I think we're sort of built for GDPR. There's the portability issue that ends up being a little interesting because, if somebody asks us, the service provider, for their data back, and we've never had it, we kind of can't give it back to them. So that's the only tricky part of that standard. But I think we can say with a really straight face, we're built to comply there. We're still a relatively small company, and we've been way more engineering focused than sales focused. So we don't have international sales people or offices or, territories, but still 50% of our customers outside of, the federal vertical, if you will, come from outside the US. So there's a lot of demand out there, and that makes sense. We've been, one of the companies that's experienced, I don't know that they've targeted us specifically, but just blocking and, countries where they like to block access to products where people can speak freely. But we've got some technology in place that helps us work in those environments.
The idea, as one of our producers said, of we can't give you your data back because we never had it, is kind of cool. And I'm thinking that's probably pretty unique. Must make for a really interesting conversation.
Well, it's funny, one of the things, this is, most of the other companies I've been a part of have been pretty bootstrapped. And so I haven't been in as much of I'm doing more fundraising, I guess I'd say, in this job than other jobs. And as I go up and down Sand Hill Road, explaining my company as the one that doesn't have access to all this data we can monetize, it definitely turns some heads, because that's the story. Everyone knocks on the door and says, I don't know what we're going to do, but I know that we're going to go monetize all this data. And I go in and say, we're going to charge businesses we're going to give them the promise that not only are we going to not monetize it, but nobody could possibly get access to it.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very interesting conversation, I can imagine, because that's how everybody's business model is running, right? They're like, if I have the data, I can figure out how to monetize it later. Your story is, no, I don't have the data, right? And
Right.
I mean, think about this, though, from a liability perspective. Because you don't have the data, you're not going to face the Facebook lawsuit because they just leaked, 40 million data records, right? Because you don't have it.
Right. Well, one could suggest that that's why Facebook is saying they're going to have everything end end encrypted, is to deal with some of that liability. I think it's very compelling, right? Like one of the things, again, I talked about what drew me to the company, but for 20 years, I was part of companies that were hired to get unauthorized access to data, and we never didn't get access to it, right? That's the thing. It's always there for an adversary to get to. So building a product that strips away that man in the middle, that capability for somebody to get access to the data, is really interesting from a security perspective. I will still say a lot of those bankers are like, well, wait a second, I don't know. Aren't we supposed to make money off the data? And so it's a little bit, scary for somebody who's an investor and maybe not a technologist. But we definitely come across as very different. And I love that difference. I think that's a big part. It's a very simple thing to use math to give a real definable promise to a customer, as opposed to we're going to do our very best to configure things and hope our people don't make mistakes. I think it's very compelling.
It's definitely a differentiator because it's not the way other people have approached this, right? When you think about messenger apps and you think about all the platforms that are out there, that is not really a criteria in the design process. I mean, you guys have thought about this up front. And my guess is at some point we're going to see more around privacy regulations here in the U.S. outside of what, California and Virginia have done and 20 some other states are in the middle of doing, right? When privacy regulation comes more to the forefront, it'll put some companies in a bind, but you're already going to be in a position to say, yeah, but we're good.
Yeah, I think, obviously, I think it's a good way to look at it because that's how I'm looking at it. And I hope I'm making sense as I make strategic decisions for this company. But, there are companies out there that are so spectacularly dependent upon data and access to data. And, you think of Office 365 and what we've experienced firsthand in the SolarWinds incident. What we've seen is, what Microsoft has been is better than anyone else in the world at a kind of packet inspection. Even from the early days of MSN, it was always like, we are going to access everything is going to get ripped out of the pipes. We're going to inspect it and we're going to jam it back in and, carry on. And to a certain extent, what they've said to the enterprises, we're still going to access all your data. We are a path to all your data, but that's the security promise we make to you. And I think they get a lot of intelligence out of the data as well. There are going to be companies that say, we operate better. We're providing a different promise. And the further we are away from the data, the better we provide our service. We're running the back end. We're a platform. We're actually charging you for something else. Our promise that we make to you as a service provider really doesn't require us having access to this data. So why are we running in this monolithic, centralized, fashion like we built everything to date? We have all these nodes, even kind of what is the Andreessen Horowitz, Ben Horowitz gave that presentation, a while back saying, the edge is going to eat the cloud. We're going to start almost in a mesh networking-ish mindset or model. Things are going to push out to the edge. We don't need that centralized server. And so what service providers don't need access to all the data? Well, I think there are going to be a lot of them as we kind of start to become more of a real IoT economy. There's just a real healthy business in not providing attack surfaces to data aggregated at a centralized server, I think. And so messaging is the beginning of that, but I think it's going to, explode far beyond messaging.
Yeah, for sure.
Pick me, Matt.
Oh, go, Jack, go.
Well, ironically, I used to work for an end-to-end encryption company, per se. It was in the public sector, let's say.
Okay.
I'm being very veiled. I am a certified cryptanalyst, formerly of the National Security Agency. So, talk a little bit about the cryptography that you guys are employing, and in particular, your strategy for key management and key distribution.
Okay, so AES 256, we do. I think the most unique thing about what we do, or like a product like Signal does, is what I talked about before. The perfect forward and backward secrecy. So when we're sending a message, every message gets a new key. There's a kind of, if you're talking about key rotation. So on the client, I am generating a new key on the send and receive for every single message. We one of the unique things about Wickr and the Wickr protocol, and this is something that existed before I got here, is it was really built for groups. So that means, and so when I go back to some of the things that I was biased about thinking were going to be difficult in building an end-to-end encrypted enterprise product, when we have a group of 20 people, that means there are 20 keys generated for every message on the send and on the receive. And so it ends up, there's a lot of key creation in our type of cryptography. And that's typically what makes it different is were you to, in some way, shape, or form, and we might actually get into a conversation at some point about quantum, but let's say that you were able to capture a single message and decrypt it. It's not really possible right now, but at some time in the future world, it will be. Then you get high, or you get that one message. You don't get to go forward and backward and get it and get everything. Hence, perfect forward and backward secrecy. Yeah.
Well, I realize they may be asking questions where you don't want to reveal secret sauce. Our philosophy, our marching orders at the End End Encryption company I used to work for is as we designed systems, we operated under the premise that the bad guys knew everything about the system, had bought one, reverse engineered it, torn it apart, had the instruction manual, everything was known about it, and we still had to protect it and secure it. So I'm comfortable asking these questions. If you're not comfortable answering the questions, feel free to, throw up the flag. So you generate unique keys per transmission or per message. How do you do the key exchange?
Well, before I get into that, one of the things I'm going to say is when I first got here, our protocol was closed, and within weeks it was up on Git, right? So I'm with you on that. I am not a cryptographer. I've worked with a lot of cryptographers, and I think what was very salient in what you said, and what is kind of an unavoidable truth, is that you need to expose your math. And so we did that right away. So, in terms of what our protocol does, it is up in public, open for review, and we get a lot of commentary in that. We've had and we pay people to look at it, et cetera. Another thing in terms of the promises and sort of what you were saying regarding your assumptions around, I don't think we call them adversaries anymore. I think the hip term is more competitors. We have a process that we call our security promises. And we essentially say, and we try and be very honest, and we actually invite third parties to be involved in this process as well. As we say, were we to attack our product, and these are this is how we would attack our product. This is the protections we have in place, and this goes beyond cryptography, but just generally the product. The way we would defeat that or defend against that attack surface would be to encrypt something in this place in this way, or we talk about these verifiable statements that essentially hold that promise, and then we pay people to test them, and then we publicly expose their results. And so I'm totally with you on this. Like, you have to basically say, I'm building a zero knowledge system, and we're defining it as zero knowledge on the basis of these things happening. And I can tell you that you can prove that the things we're saying are happening by virtue of conducting a specific test. And then we're going to go pay people to actually do the test and then publish their results. If you want to get into a deep cryptographic conversation, I'm going to have to call our head cryptographer, another Joel, probably.
No worries.
But
and I did not, and I in no way intended to put you on the spot.
No, it's fine. I roll with this. Like I said, world renowned in some things, cryptography not so much.
I am curious. What are some of the business challenges that you run into running an end-to-end encryption company? Like, how are you guys monetizing that from an enterprise standpoint? And then what are some of the challenges that you're running into in today's kind of modern landscape?
Well, I mean, from an enterprise, I guess, selling standpoint, our biggest challenge is essentially in certain verticals, and I think it goes beyond certain verticals like financial services. I think it goes beyond that. End-to-end encryption is banned. It's end-to-end encryption is defined simply as Wickr, Messenger, Signal, WhatsApp, used to circumvent corporate controls, and security departments view it as nothing other than that. So when we get into a conversation, there's an initial bias that would just be like, yeah, I'm the CISO, and there's no way I'm going to ever let this into I'm going to use it for my own personal communications, but I'm not going to deploy this thing for the reasons that we brought up earlier around compliance. So we have to draw their attention and kind of redefine what end-to-end encryption is and say, you can deploy this responsibly, and you can get your company, the protections you would want to have while staying in compliance. And that's a mental model that not very many, there are a lot of people who are not ready to accept that mental model. So we're really kind of defining the market differently, which is a hard thing to do as a 60-person company.
Does that also
two questions in there.
Provide challenges around? Does that also provide challenges around some of the legal aspects and having to deal with general counsel such as Jen?
Yeah, well, I mean, it depends. I mean, it's funny. We have law firms who are customers, but they tend to be forward-thinking people who are understanding the law to be what it is. There are things that don't always need to be recorded, and I don't know. I mean, there are a couple things. There are general counsels who've just gone through a breach, and they've had every single email in the company taken from them. And they think, oh, wouldn't it be great if there was a subset of our communications that people knew were different and private and protected, and stamping a header privilege and confidential doesn't do you a whole lot of good when an adversary pulls down your whole email spool. So, that lawyer thinks, oh my God, this is like my safety net. I want this thing so badly because that was incredibly painful for us. There are also, there are plenty of law firms. This is something kind of new to me, but, there are SCIFs and law firms, and any of those big firms that are kind of operating in that space fully understand the need to secure things differently. There are also law firms that just say, I don't really care about data security, because if anyone ever kind of pops our servers, I'm just going to sue them. You know, their hammer is not technology; their hammer is litigation. And so that mindset around, and the kind of partner decision making around technology solutions, really kind of silos them into a subset of legal minds and law firms that just don't want to be super innovative around technology. We have a new burgeoning cool partnership with a group called Renyon Court that is trying to be essentially like an ASP for law firms and give them a portfolio of really advanced technological solutions, partially to protect their, data, et cetera. But, the thing that I find really fascinating is that there are some very technical lawyers out there, and they're, from a retention standpoint, this is the thing that is like really unanticipated by me, at least, is that law firms need to seem as though they are at the forefront technologically to maintain some of their best talent. So that might, more than securing their data, their customers' data, it might be retaining their top talent is the thing that's going to have them deploy products like Wickr.
Awesome. So, go ahead, Lee.
So I was thinking, you talked about the lawyers and I don't want to. What is the general mindset these days on the need to encrypt? I mean, it used to be, that's only for you government folks. Is it becoming more pervasive that it's really need to do more than stick that confidentiality statement, or is there still a long way to go?
Well, Elon Musk sure thinks there's a need for it, right? Like, look, we've all been in this industry for a long time. So the headlines, people are becoming numb to breaches. That's for sure. So I don't know that there's a huge amount of behavior change when, this breach, that breach. But I think SolarWinds it really caught the attention of a lot of people, and we've seen, our Wickr Messenger app usage go up. Signal talks about their usage going up, and obviously WhatsApp's got a couple billion users. So there is a pattern. I mean, there's statistical relevance in saying people are running towards end-to-end encryption. They typically are doing that in a consumer sense, right? And so really what ends up happening, a lot of our demand is all of our people are using Signal, or all of our people are using WhatsApp, but that breaks our compliance model. We can't do that. We have no sustainable strategy for our organization using consumer products. I mean, an analogy that works for me is Strava, that exercise app that a lot of people use, and it turns out a lot of people in the military used it, and it's fun. It's a consumer app. It's a toy, kind of like Signal or Wickr Messenger. But then it exposed all the movements of our troops, right? Like, organizations are really scared when a large part of their work goes on to something that's completely not controlled and over which they have no domain, if you will. And so it's really, as people are moving to consumer end-to-end encrypted products, that the organization says, I've got two choices. I need to either tell people they can't have end-to-end encrypted communications, or I've got to figure out how to do it in a way that we kind of can create and follow rules that are sustainable for our organization. So I do think it's going beyond just sort of the tinfoil hat wearing people at the fort. And now what's happening, though, is organizations where it's being used at high levels are looking for the longer term solution. How can we do this, and how can we do this responsibly?
So what kind of go ahead, Matt.
I was going to say, I said, one of the challenges I see, Art Coviello talked about this a few years back when I was working at RSA, this balance between privacy and security. And there's been this kind of mantra from the security side that, I need to inspect all this traffic. And when end-to-end encryption's in play, how do they tap into that encrypted traffic to be able to monitor it, right? You were talking about the Microsoft use case. We almost have to shift away from that mindset a little bit, because if security has to be able to analyze all that traffic, then they're always going to want to try to figure out a way to decrypt that traffic. And doesn't that just it lessens the end-to-end encryption story, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. The way I always talk about this is I'm in the security industry, and the security team is wearing an EFF t-shirt, and yet they're running a dragnet against their employees, right? Like that's just is what it is. Like security teams want access to all of the things. I think the exception would be some of our clients when I was back at ISEC realized that they actually didn't need to inspect everything, right? And they're good enough at their jobs that if they're getting signal that there's something going on, they can figure out in a more targeted fashion what needs to be investigated. And when they get to make some of those promises to their employees, that it isn't a dragnet, that you can actually say something constructive to a coworker about a boss, that is a really enabling moment for your employee. And so, yeah, I do think it's a mindset change for security people who typically are rather dismissive of anything having to do with privacy. And they're just like, nah, we're just going to take everything down. And oh, by the way, we're so good that we'll secure all this data and communications and no one will ever get access to it. That to me is kind of the point at which that argument breaks down. And
yeah, because this works so well. Yeah. Never.
Right. Like, I mean, so I think people are getting some self-awareness there, right? That the problem, and this goes back to some of the challenges around enterprise end-to-end encryption, is that you have to be pretty good at data, right? And understanding how you segment different data sets, actually identifying what data is what. And, in order to use end-to-end encryption like Wickr enterprise products effectively, you have to have some pretty basic rules around who gets to say what to whom, what needs to be captured, what can be private. And realistically, there aren't very many companies that are incredibly good at that.
Yeah. Well, we know because all their data classification policies are completely all over the place.
Yeah. It's kind of, I think there's a real underappreciation within the market for how immature that part of the large organization is, right? And so that's got to grow. And honestly, that's what GDPR is trying to force down the throats of organizations, right?
Yeah, for sure.
So I'm kind of curious around what's some of the future roadmap and some of the exciting things that the Wickr has kind of on the table that you're working on.
Well, so a recent roadmap item that's incredibly important to us is something we call global federation. So that means that all of our products can communicate with each other. And it was really born out of the fact when we first came in to build this enterprise product, I didn't really know what to do with the consumer product, to be totally honest. I had a board of directors who had hired me in to do build out a end-to-end encrypted enterprise product. And we had, 14 million users of Wickr Messenger. That mattered a ton to us, but there wasn't a monetization strategy, if you will. So I wasn't sure what to do. And then I started talking to our customers, and it became very clear that we were keeping Wickr Messenger going in perpetuity. So I was a pretty small team, and I didn't know how I was going to build multiple products. And so what we essentially did is it's the same code base, same protocol, same everything. And so that's important to us because, there aren't many communication products that offer this up. Our enterprise, our on-prem customers can speak to a Wickr Messenger customer, can speak to a SaaS customer for Acme company. And you have administrative controls to either enable or disable that. So you can say, I want my legal team to be able to use Wickr to speak outside the organization, or I want them not to, or I just want my executive team, or you can throttle who gets to have that functionality. And that ended up being really important from a cost perspective because when our customers are spinning up a project, or let's say it's a mission or something like that, and there's a business partner or a coalition partner, somebody that they want to bring into this project. They don't necessarily want to give away seat licenses or go through like a procurement process. And so people can spin up really fast and be part of a room and work on a, like say like a 2-week, very sensitive thing. And then they can tear that room down. And so federation for us is incredibly important. Beyond that, we have some customers who are white labeling their products. So it really makes us more like, it's very expansive because all the products can talk to each other. Some things that have existed in the product right now that people don't understand, even just video conferencing. I mean, we do video conferencing up to hundreds of users. We do a lot with bots and, something we call Wickr IO, where we're building integrations into other products and people are building end-to-end encrypted workflows. And really our strategy there, again, it's very similar, to the compliance piece where we don't define people's rules. We're not telling people, we're not building integrations and workflows for people necessarily. We're giving them the ability to do that. So for instance, we have customers who have employees in sensitive places, let's say, and as they onboard new people, the entire onboarding process, including where to send all the equipment and materials to that new employee, we'll call it, is handled within Wickr. We have a government using us for remote proxy voting because it turns out it's good to have a cryptographic fingerprint and certainty around who casted a vote at what time and what the vote was. So it's a really extensible platform as opposed to just like a messaging app. I think people tend to think of us as a messaging app, but we're doing a lot more than that.
Those are really cool. So I guess to trace back to one thing you said interesting with the federation and some of the obviously single sign-on and SAML that's happening, do you see that as introducing a larger attack surface? Obviously, it's a necessary attack, or it's a necessary functionality for most modernized companies. If you're going to have a SaaS platform, you're going to have single sign-on or SAML of some kind, and to be able to integrate that to their logging and monitoring. But introducing that provides obviously a bigger footprint for you to have to secure and make sure that is correct. And that puts a little bit of burden back to the customer to ensure that they're doing that right. So do you guys have like customer success where you're working on onboarding that correctly and getting those pieces correct? Yeah,
I mean, you nailed it. It's just one of those things. I mean, we had the most tinfoil hat solution of all, right? And because of that, the market that was addressable was relatively small. And so as we were going to, we adopted OIDC, rather than SAML as our first step as an example, but did we push some of that responsibility like Okta or to the customer? Yeah, the answer is yeah. And I think that was just realistically, there was no other way to get out to the enterprise. The alternative, I brought this up earlier, was for us to go and essentially say like, hey, you've been doing identity wrong forever. And those millions of dollars and years of blood, sweat, and tears you put into your solution, well, I think you should rip it out and just do something different for us. And that wasn't going to fly, right? So what we have to do is understand that we're going to be working within the construct of how those companies get tools to their employees and stakeholders and help them do it as securely as possible.
Your statement may be true. We might have done identity and access wrong from the beginning, but you're right. Ripping and replacing it is not. Well,
as a go-to-market strategy, that's a rough one, right? Yeah. That would be rather difficult.
Yes, it would. Any other questions from any of the other hosts?
So actually, we had a funny comment from Discord that Wickr would really miss the boat if they didn't introduce a product called furniture.
I like that. Yeah, it's I wasn't here when it was branded. I will say there are a number of different stories, from lighting a wick to somebody with a French accent saying "we care." Who knows? But it's going to be the verb. It'll be the Kleenex of messaging securely or communicating securely. Wickr's the verb.
Right.
Yeah.
Do you Wickr?
Exactly.
So actually, a serious question. You think about, would Wickr become an embedded product, embedded function that somebody else could layer on top of? Have you thought about that?
Yeah,
as an
well,
API?
actually that's kind of the right question, and the way I didn't answer the roadmap question. So we have an MVP SDK, and the SDK is coming out. That's very much part of the strategy. I'd say, when I was brought in, something that really excites me, I talked about this earlier, but a lot of the stuff we're doing, it's really early, and when I say we're kind of enabling machine to machine communications. That I think, it's very sexy for me. I think there's a really big market for this. IoT. Yeah. Well, what can I say? I can say IoT, post quantum. I don't know what other buzzwords can I use, but blockchain,
AI
Bitcoin.
and ML. Yes.
Yeah.
AI. Don't forget ML, GPU.
We're enabling them all, exactly. But in all seriousness, from an IoT perspective, if there's compute and battery power, then this type of key management can be done at the edge. And so, whether that's a drone talking to an airplane or satellites talking to other things, there's some really cool things I think that will be done, hopefully by Wickr, but certainly in the world of end-to-end encryption. That's pretty exciting. And so, I think it's a tad bit of a non-Wickr strategy to say we're going to define how all of that is going to be done. What we want to do is give people a platform for them to do it. So, that's our strategy.
Is that SDK going to be something that is going to be open source? Is that going to be kind of a paid platform? Obviously, I can see a million uses between medical devices, legacy, OT, and ICS especially. This seems like a very great use case for that. So just thinking big picture here and how this gets implemented quickly in spaces that very badly need this to happen. What is kind of the strategic idea behind that?
It'll start out being paid for. That's kind of how we're talking to some of our customers right now. And it's nascent, and I think that's the right way to do it. We're proving it out right now. Longer term strategy, you bring up some really interesting future board meetings, I guess is what I would say.
So do you think we'll see the Wickr protocol RFC at some point?
That would be pretty cool.
Cool.
Certain industries that I could definitely see.
Just in that vein, one thing I want to bring up is something that we participate in a ton. I think is really interesting to look at, and probably there's not enough time to talk about it right now. But is something called messaging layer security. That would be at like a protocol level, something that I think is going to enable a lot of change in this space, just on the basis of performance and capability and scale.
Yeah, for sure. There's definitely some industries where I could see this fitting in the autonomous vehicle, for example, and just protecting those communications with all those systems, I think are very interesting use cases for what you guys have already built. So,
I hope so.
Joel, thank you so much for joining us on Paul's Security Weekly.
Yeah, anytime. I really appreciate it, guys. Fun.
Thank you. We're going to take a quick break and then cover the security news.